Hello and welcome to the latest of the MJ444 restoration videos. My name's Peter Hall, Aero Legends volunteer. The last one I did was all about the history of MJ444, and we've got some interesting and exciting updates I'd like to share with you this time. Last time we got as far as finding Pilot Officer Steve Butt's logbook, all sent from Canada, or copies of it, which confirmed that MJ444 was KHD, her code letters were KHD in 403 Squadron. I think this needs a bit of explanation just to try and make it a bit simpler. And here's one I have made earlier, quite conveniently, a rather lovely Corgi model in 403 Squadron colours. So as we know, MJ444 was first issued to 411 Canadian Squadron, then 403 Canadian Squadron, and finished up with 443 Canadian Squadrons. So when I'm talking about aircraft code letters, so all the squadrons, they would have these letters on the side of the fuselage here. So the squadron would be KH, so this was KH for 403 Squadron, and then they would have, each aircraft would have its own individual code letter, which in this case is B. So KHB is 403 Squadron, and it's aircraft B. They also have a serial number, which is the much smaller one under here. MJ444 is our aircraft, and this is obviously another aircraft. So KHB on there. So we know that she was with 411 Squadron, which is Aero Legends Elizabeth, and she is DB is the squadron code for 411, and she is E. E for Elizabeth is her individual aircraft code letter, and the aircraft serial number is NH341. So when she was issued to 403 Squadron in December 44, she was repainted and became KHD. So as this model here, KH, the squadron codes for 403 Squadron, and D for dog is the individual aircraft code letter. What we didn't know before was what she was when she was with 443 Squadron afterwards, and in that we had a massive amount of help from Canadian aviation historians, especially a guy called Lee Walsh. And Lee did loads of research on my behalf in Canada, talking to all the Canadian Air Force forums. They're very proud of their aviation heritage in Canada, great forums there and some great research being done. Long story short, Lee managed to contact the family of Flying Officer Harold Fairfield, who was MJ444's last pilot. He bailed out of her on the 13th of January 1945. They felt very strongly that they had his logbook, they've got his medals, and they've got a gold caterpillar, which you got for bailing out of aircraft by using a parachute to save your life, and they've also got his logbook. We are absolutely privileged that they decided that the right place for this logbook was with MJ444 and Aero Legends. So it's an enormous honour, a huge privilege to have this. Just to hold it is a privilege. It's the whole of his flying career from beginning to end, and every flight from training to his last flight, all recorded in here. He's a good record keeper because it matches up completely with the operational record books of 443 Squadron. So just looking at it for a minute, it begins in December 41, Boxing Day 1941 in Canada, when he was with the elementary flying training school and learning to flying an aircraft, sort of the Canadian version of the Tiger Moth really, an aircraft called a Fleet Finch. I'd never heard of it before this, but yeah, used extensively in Canada as a training biplane. He then moved on to the Harvard as an advanced trainer, flew that at another training school, and then on an operational squadron on the east coast of Canada, where he also flew the Canadian-built Hurricane. So in late December 1943, the Canadians decided that they would come overseas, come to the UK and take part in the Allied invasion of Europe, essentially. They set sail from Canada in early January 1944, and in a ship called the SS Pasteur, which was a pre-war transatlantic liner, which we borrowed from the French for the duration of the war, and it was used for convoys and as a troop transport. The ship was so fast that it could cross the Atlantic unescorted. It was faster than the U-boats, so it had no convoy protection of any kind. It just was travelling so fast it travelled on its own. And they arrived in, the Canadians arrived in Liverpool, in a blacked out Britain, in late January 1944. Went up to RAF Digby in Lincolnshire, and having rushed them over here, it was a bit of a slow start really. They started flying Spitfire 5s, which at that time of the war was quite a rare animal really. The Czech squadrons had just converted to the Mark 9 Spitfire, so consequently there were 3 squadrons worth of very, very war-weary, pretty clapped-out Spitfire Mark 5s. That's what Harold's first flight was, in one of those. And then they started they came down south to Holmesley South in the New Forest. They started regularly moving. Quite a pain for them really, but deliberate, because it was part of the forthcoming Allied invasion of Europe, and it was all about mobility. So every month, it seemed, often more than that, the squadron would pack up and move. And at this time they were living in either Nissen huts or tented accommodation. Harold's first flight, operational flight, was on the 13th of April. And like the rest of the flights, they were either fighter sweeps or bomber escorts into France, into occupied Europe, and all in preparation for the D-Day landings. And Harold kept his logbook, as I say, meticulously. There was a fighter sweep in April when they all took off and tangled with some Focke-Wulf 190s over the Paris area. And what happened after that's a bit of a mystery really, because 4 of them ended up at Exeter, way down in Devon, and Harold and another Spitfire pilot both crash landed out of fuel in Dorset. Recorded in his logbook as aircraft B. 2-1 was the squadron codes for 443 squadron. So whereas 403 was KH, 443 squadron was the unusual 2I. Harold often flew aircraft 2IB was the individual aircraft code. And his family, again, rather lovely of them, they've given us a superb photograph of Harold next to this aircraft, which we've managed with a bit of detective work. That's the aircraft that he crash landed in Dorset when he ran out of fuel in April 44. Quite a nice photograph of him and his ground crew. And they get the aircraft movement card from the RAF Museum at Hendon, and confirms, yes, that aircraft was crash landed on the 25th of April and is so badly damaged that it actually never flew again. Harold was then involved, the whole squadron was then involved in the D-Day landings. The first squadron to operate overseas from the advanced landing grounds in Normandy, and then they push right across Europe, right through 1944 into 1945. Harold's a man of few words in his logbook. It's very accurate, but he puts really clobbered by a 109. The aircraft was actually so badly damaged that she had to force land it, and it took a long time to repair it. During this time, in August 44, he actually claimed an aircraft as damaged. He was involved in a dogfight over France and damaged a Focke-Wulf 190, which went down streaming smoke. So a confirmed kill, if you like. It's certainly damaged, badly damaged, which we were unaware of. And the combat report for this survives in the National Archives. So if you can imagine, he'd have flown back. His aircraft was damaged in the dogfight. He flew back, landed, and he'd speak to the intelligence officer and fill in your combat report, which it's nice to have that. As I say, a man of few words. The 13th of January 1945, he's flying MJ444, which we now know was 2IA. So his aircraft A was its individual code letter on 443 squadron. Shot down by flak over the Battle of the Bulge area in Belgium, and in his logbook he just says bailed out. It just says bailed out, and this is quite a traumatic event for anybody really. You know, shot down by flak. The front line, it's not clear whether he was over enemy lines or our lines. but it bailed out luckily into our lines, Allied lines, and was given a lift back to the squadron by an American Jeep driver. But quite a traumatic event, during which he received an ankle injury and was in hospital for a couple of days, but bailed out. That seems to have covered it back then. Early 1945, he's back on the squadron. He's flying Spitfire Mark 16s, so an improved Mark 9. He's getting involved in fighter sweeps. The Luftwaffe are firmly staying on the ground at this time, and then all of a sudden it's over for him. His tour was complete. He'd done the required number of flights, more than he actually recorded, but he'd done enough flights, and he was sent back to the United Kingdom. He then joined, the change of pace must have been incredible, because he joined a ferry unit at RAF Melton Mowbray in Leicestershire, and this was just ferrying aircraft around. And he seems to have done just one trip, which was from South Wales in a Spitfire, South Wales, down to Cornwall, down to France, along the south coast of France, to the Adriatic coast in Italy. It took him a couple of days, and that was his last operational flight. The last flights recorded in his logbook are two familiarisation flights in a Mustang, and then that's where the book ends. And he then went home to Canada and lived a long and happy life, raised a family, worked for Canada Customs, and sadly passed away in the 2000s. Yeah, to have this logbook with us now is an absolute honour, and when it arrived in the Canada Post box for me at home, you're touching something that's returned to the UK for the first time since sort of May 1945. Very privileged to have that, and we hope that when MJ444 makes the first post-restoration rebuild flight, that this logbook will be in the aircraft. So to conclude, really, we've done all the historical research pretty much that we can do with MJ444, and this has really given the boss the material he needs to make a decision on. We have to paint the Spitfire in some sort of markings, and we'd like them to be accurate. There's a real drive within the company to keep it accurate. So as far as 411 squadron goes, we didn't have any confirmed flights with her, with MJ444 on that squadron. 403 squadron, we know KHD and 12 operational flights over Europe. 443 squadron, 12 operational flights, and we know that it was 2IA. Really a decision for the boss to make, and his decision was that the aircraft will be painted in 403 squadron markings, so it will be KHD will be the markings used, and they are going on as we speak at Duxford. We've got that lovely link with Headcorn, North Weald, both bases used by Aero Legends for our operations, and this Spitfire will be in 403 squadron markings. A really nice end to the historical research.